is TWiP. Let's get going. So we're about 1 minute after the hour. Thanks, everyone. I know will continue to fold in over the next couple minutes or so, but we'll get started. And just a couple of housekeeping things before we begin here. I want to thank our friends over at the DVE store for their support of this event and hopefully future events. So check them out at dvestore.com. And I also want to thank my friend here sitting next to me, Mr. Lee Herbet, for agreeing to do this. He's a friend of This Week in Photo, has been for many, many years. He is our go-to expert for video, and we have a couple of go-to experts. Lee's one of them, but Lee. When I have a problem on how to solve things, you're the first person I think of. I have a little Lee Herbet sitting on my shoulder right there, giving me advice on what to do next. So video like the back of your hand. Housekeeping. Last bit of housekeeping. Feel free to throw your questions into the Q&A section. I believe we have that enabled. Yeah, at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you have a question, feel free to throw it in there. Towards the end of the webinar, which is going to be just about an hour long, we'll get to those and blow through them. And then lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay. Since you registered, you will get an email probably within the next day or so with instructions on how to view it, basically a link. Okay, and with that, Lee, so we're talking about visual storytelling or storytelling using video for the still photographer. And you and I have been talking about this for a while. We have a course on This Week in Photo to this effect. Set the stage for the people that are watching. What are we going to be talking about, or what are you going to be presenting on tonight?
Well, thanks, Frederick. Well, to begin with, I'm going to look at just a little bit about visual literacy when it comes to video, in terms of how you might come, particularly as a photographer, you might come to video with this is a way that I compose shots, this is the way I set up shots, and I want to try and change your thinking a little bit when it comes to video, because you do compose and slightly differently with video sometimes, not always, than you do with photography. And then I want to take a little bit of a slight dusting of an overview of what you can do with Final Cut Pro with the video that you're working on and things like that. As Frederick mentioned, I've got a course, so this will be sort of like an introduction to that. We're going to cover bits and pieces of that. Now, I will also mention, for those who haven't been to any of my webinars before, I do like to take questions as well. So please, while we're going through, I'll sort of stop every 5 or 10 minutes or so and just go, does everyone understand that? Are there questions on this? Because I really like the interaction. So please feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A or in the comments, and Frederick will help me sort of pass through those as we're going through. So Absolutely. Without further ado, let's jump on in. And let me
I'm gonna give you you have the keys. I'm gonna drop off and mute myself and spotlight you. You have the stage, and then I'll be listening, obviously, and then I'll pop in at the end as you wrap up.
Cool. So everyone's looking at my screen here, and so this is Final Cut, and we'll get into a little bit about what all the bits and bobs and buttons are. But first, I want to take you through this video in terms of how you think about framing when you're shooting video. And this is very important, because I think that it's really advantageous to, even if you don't plan to ever edit your video yourself, like let's say you're thinking of shooting some video, but when it comes to the editing side of things, you're just going to get someone else to edit it. I think it's really important, even if you're not editing the video, to at least understand the process of editing, because understanding the process of editing and understanding what's required for editing, it's going to make you a much better shooter, and it's going to help you deliver the content that you need for the edit. Even now, I've been doing this for longer than I care to remember, but even now I'll, go out on a shoot and I'm all in the back of my mind as I'm shooting content, what content am I going to need for when I'm actually editing this footage? So I want to make sure that I get those shots, instead of getting to the edit process and then go, oh, I wish I had a shot of X and I forgot to get that shot. So this is a little example that I often use to really accentuate this process. When I deliver the session live, what I normally do is I get one of the photographers and I say to them, I'd like you to film someone walking through a door. And what they'll do is they will pick up the camera, they will push record, and they will follow someone walking through a door, or they will lead someone walking through a door. And it'll look a little something like this. And that's fine. By the way, I have tidied my office. That was when I was reorganizing my office, and that's why it looked like a bomb exploded, and it's much tidier now, as you can see. So walking through a door, and that's how you could film someone walking through a door. But as a video editor, you can cut from one angle to another. So as a video editor, I don't want just one angle and one perspective of what happened. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a wide shot of locked off wide shot of my subject walking into the frame or running into the frame. Then I cut to a medium side profile shot of my subject walking towards the door. Then I cut to a close-up of the door handle with my subject turning the door handle. And then we cut to the final shot of our subject coming through the door. And that's what I mean by thinking about video editing when you're shooting. Because if you weren't used to that sort of visual literacy, you might shoot everything with just a single angle and a single shot, get back to the edit suite, start editing it, and it's okay. You could visually tell that story much better with all of those different angles and all of those different cuts. So that's the first thing that I want you to be thinking about when we're going through this whole process. So just before we move on, are there any questions about that little process that I've spoken about?
And if you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat there, and we'll read them out. But if I see those pop up, Lee, I'll go ahead and read them out to you.
Okay, cool. So I'm not seeing any questions come up at the moment on that. So we will move on and we'll get stuck into what Final Cut is and how it can work. So if anyone isn't familiar with Final Cut Pro is Apple's high-end video editing application. And there was a major change to Final Cut Pro back in 2011. And that change caused a lot of ruffles in the industry because it pretty much changed from Final Cut to Final Cut Pro 10. It was a completely different app. And there were a few things missing and so on and so forth. But within 6 months, most of those features had come back. And now, 10 years later, it is an amazing full-featured app. But the thing that I love about it the most is that I think it's very easy to get your head around how to edit video in Final Cut Pro. Now, I'm not saying it's the best application. It's the best application for me, but everyone's brain works differently. So workflows may work differently for different people. But I find with some other video editing apps, you open it up the first time and it's like opening up Photoshop the first time. You're like, oh my word, that is a lot of buttons. And it can be quite intimidating. Whereas Final Cut Pro, relatively speaking, doesn't have that many buttons as you just start looking at it. So let's jump into just the user interface. I'm just going to sort of highlight what the user interface is of.
Before you do that, Lee, let's take a couple of questions came in. Craig Stampley says, for clips like this, your door clip, are straight cuts the most suitable? I am guessing, you know, or do you want to put a fancy transition or cross dissolve on there?
So that's a really good question. So, and I'm going to sort of answer that. Most of my answers with most things will be a depends. So if you watch television and movies, generally, you're just going to see straight cuts from one clip to another. And so I normally recommend, as an editor, everything that you do needs to be motivated by story. So if there is a reason in the story to have like a star wipe or weird sort of funky kind of transition, then absolutely put it in if it helps drive the story forward. But if it doesn't help drive the story forward, I always say rather just stick with straight cuts and leave it at that. So that's my recommendation when it comes to cuts.
The other question is from Dan. Dan says, how many takes do you do, or how many takes do you shoot per shot?
Again, it very much depends. You could get the shot, like you could have a one take wonder. So you could just, again, it's very important to visualize what you're going to be doing before you shoot. So for example, I do, depending on the job, but a lot of jobs I will storyboard. So you've already got in your mind what you want the shot to look like. And so if you storyboarded and you got the shot, one take is fine. But sometimes, particularly with creative endeavors, you might want to have a few options. Like you might want to go, oh, I want the actor to be a little bit sad in this one, but I also, it could work that they could be a little bit happy. So again, it always depends on how many takes you can get. And sometimes having too many takes can actually be a hindrance, because you're like, you get to the edit and you're like, got 15 takes. Like, God, I don't know which ones to. Most of the time when I've got that situation where I've got too many takes, the last one's normally the best, because after the last one you stopped. Although sometimes with the last one it can also be bad, because after the last one you stop because everyone was just too tired. So yeah, you as many takes as it takes, I suppose, but don't overdo it, I suppose. Is where I would go with that.
Okay, press on.
Let me go back into my sharing my desktop. And so let me take you through just a little bit of basics about the user interface of Final Cut Pro. So over on the top left-hand side, you've got what's called your browser. And this is where you see your libraries, your events. It's like a file browser. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new library to show you sort of the very starting process in Final Cut Pro. So I'm going to go File, New, and I'm going to say Library. Library is your parent structure of everything that you're working in. So everything that you're working on in a, I'm going to say project, but I hesitate to say that because Final Cut calls something else projects, but everything that you're working on in a job lives in your library. So we'll open up a library and we'll call this one demo. And then it asks you where you want to save it. So I'm just going to save it in my movies folder, and I'll go save. And there's my demo library. And you know that it's a demo library because it's got these 4 icons, like they're little squares with stars in them. And if I go down a little bit, I'm just going to close the walking one, so it's out of the way and it's not confusing us by seeing 2 open at the same time. And you can have as many libraries as you want open up at the same time if you wanted. But you'll notice that underneath, within the library structure, and if I close it and open it up, you can see that's the stuff within it. There's this thing called an event, and that's got a square with a star in it. So you know that's an event. And if you look on for your library, it's got a whole bunch of squares with stars in it. So it's a very easy visual way to remember that your events live inside your library. And this is just sort of like folders within folders sort of thing. And where you might put things in multiple events as opposed to just putting everything inside a library is, let's say you were working on a series. So let's say I'm working on the new series of MacGyver, for argument's sake. And so my library would be, I did pick one that's spelled differently. I'm going to call this, we're going to call it Billions instead. So let's say we're working on the show Billions. So we're going to call our library Billions Season 7, for argument's sake. And then this event is going to be episode 1. And then you create another event. So you go File, New, Event, and this would be called episode 2. And so everything that you've shot for episode 1 would live in episode 1. Everything you shot for episode 2 would live in episode 2. But all of those things will live within your Billions Season 7 library. So that's the structure. There's not much to think about there. That's pretty much how it works. So that's your basic library structure. Then
before you continue, just a quick question on storage locations. So yes. which is critical. So the way that I operate when I use Final Cut is I have everything on a little, let's see, external, the projects that I'm working on. Usually it's a project with a bunch of templates in there for the different shows and projects I work on. And I just duplicate one of those projects and drag the new media in to replace placeholders. But everything gets on there, and that project tends to get gigantic because all the files live within it. Am I doing it the right way? Is that right or wrong?
Well, I get it. There's 2 different ways to do it, and there isn't a right or a wrong. There's just a way depending on which workflow works best for you. And you've sort of opened up a little can of worms here, because we could on just workflow structures and file structures for an hour.
That'll be part two.
Yeah. But to explain it very briefly, and I'll actually show you this in the next window, which is the import window. So let's say we've started this library. Oh, excuse me. And now we want to import some footage. Now you could just drag and drop footage, but it's better to use the import window because it gives you more options. So you can import by either coming over to the top left-hand side, and there's a little down arrow button here. And this actually lets me show you something kind of cool that I like to say. On a Mac, your mouse is your manual. So if you want to know what any button does in any app on the Mac, if you just hover your mouse over that button, it will come up with a little tooltip that shows you what that button does. So if I hover over this key thing, it shows show or hide the keyword edit, and it shows me the keyboard shortcut for that is Command K. And if I hover my mouse over the arrow, it goes import media from a device, camera, or archive, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Command I. So I'm going to push Command I to bring up my import window. And you can see here that this is like a Finder window, and already it's seeing my cameras that are plugged in. It's seeing my hard drives that are plugged in, and I can look at various favorite folders that I've created. And I've got this folder here that I've prepared for today's project called Simon Shoot. Now I could double click on Simon Shoot, and it shows me other subfolders that I've created within Simon's Shoot. And then I can say, well, show me this iPhone 13 folder, and then I can see all the different videos that are within that folder. Now I could bring in these videos one at a time, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to bring in the entire Simon Shoot folder, and it's just going to bring everything in. And if we go over to the right-hand side, you can see here it says, do I want to add it to an existing event, or do I want to create a new event? So I can create a new one, but I'm happy just adding it to episode 0. And the next bit underneath it where it says files, this is referencing what Frederick was asking me about. So with Final Cut Pro, you can either bring all of the footage and all of the photos and all of the music and everything that you're working on in that Final Cut Pro library and save it all inside that library. And I'm actually just going to drag a little Finder window. Let me just go and set this up quickly. Going to drag a little Finder window in here. And so here's the Finder window of my movies folder. And you can see there's the Billions library. And you can see there's a Scott Flair library. There's a whole bunch of different libraries here. But here's one that I've been working on, Fruity Back to School. And you can see that this library is 164 gigs in size. But if I go and have a look, let's say, for example, the Roxanne library, this is only 15.3 gigs. And that's because obviously one library has got a lot more footage that it's working with, and one has got less footage. If you set copy to library as the option that you want, and you could change this later on as well, but if you set this to copy to library, everything that you import into your library is going to live in that library. It's going to copy wherever those video files are and put a copy into your library. Now, the advantage of that is you now know that everything you need is in that library. So Frederick was mentioning that he works on his libraries on a little Lassie external hard drive. So let's say Frederick has an iMac and he's got a MacBook Pro as well. So he wants to work on this while he's working on his iMac, and he's working on his iMac. And then he decides, you know what, I want to go watch some TV, but I want to edit some of this while I'm watching TV. So he can just close the library, close Final Cut Pro on his iMac, eject that Lassie hard drive, plug it into his laptop, sit down, open up the library, and hey presto, he's working with everything because everything is encapsulated inside that library. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage to that option is those libraries get pretty big sometimes. To give you an idea, most of the projects that I work on will be anywhere from 2 to 4 terabytes. So that means your library, just with the footage, is 4 terabytes, and then there's render files and all this other stuff. So it can get really chunky. So the other option is to say leave files in place. And what that does is that doesn't copy any of the files into your library. It just creates a shortcut back to those files. So the advantage of this is that it keeps your library nice and small and manageable. But the disadvantage is if you want to take everything, you've got to remember to take the folder that had all of your footage in it, as well as your library file. So as I said, not a right or a wrong. It just depends on how you prefer to work. Now, the way I prefer to work, I like leaving my files in place. So I'm not actually going to copy anything into this library. I'm just going to tell Final Cut, hey, point this library back to all of the photos and videos and music that's in the Simon Shoot folder. And the next cool bit is you can tell Final Cut to create keywords from Finder tags or from folders. So this is really cool because I've pre-created these folders with some GoPro stuff, some images, some iPhone 13 Pro, ProRes, music options. I will automatically have keywords of those folders when I bring this into Final Cut. And you've got a whole bunch of other things, but I don't want to go too deep into this because otherwise we won't have time to get into anything else. So let's go ahead and import all. And magically, these files are now in my folder right away. They're in my event, sorry, right away. Now, in reality, remember, these files aren't actually in this library. They're still living in that folder, but Final Cut is immediately looking at these right away. So there's files. You can see that it's showing me these files as little thumbnails, and I can just skim my mouse over any of these thumbnails to watch the whole clip. So it's a nice sort of visual way to be able to very easily see what you're working with. Now you can also change the view of this. Sorry, just Zoom's doing something weird, but it's the menu things at the top. I'm not that familiar with Zoom. How do I get the menu off of this screen onto another screen, Frederick?
I think you'll need to stop sharing and then share the other one.
Okay. So we just stop sharing, and I will bring the sharing back. Let's see if that does the trick. Nope, it came back there. So we will manage without it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to bring this down a bit. Actually, I'll tell you what, I will go full screen in Final Cut, and that'll solve that problem. So you'll notice that over at the top of the window, that's the window where you see all the thumbnails, I've got some little buttons over here at the top. Now, the first one that I'm clicking on, this will change the view. So instead of a thumbnail view, it can give you a detail, or what we would know as a list view. And what's nice about this is whenever you click on any of the clips, you then get a little preview above it, and you can, again, still skim through these, and it gives you a preview over in the viewer window to the right of it. And if I scroll along to the right, you can see that there's actually columns in this view. So it's showing me information like my start and my end of my clip. It's showing me the media duration, when it was created, what camera angle, if I've set in notes. And if I right click on any of those columns, you can see there's a plethora of columns that I can add, and I can build my own custom ones. So that's a pretty cool feature of, again, it's one of those things where on the surface, Final Cut is really simple and basic, but if you want to take a deep dive, there's a lot of depth to it as well.
Cool.
So I preview my clips, and I can see what's going on with my clips. And these are all just photos. And then I've got some video clips, and I can play them through. Then over to the right, I've got my viewer, which is where I get the sort of like big view of this video clip. And over on the far right, I've got what's called my inspector. And this shows me information about any of my files. It's almost like if you were to right click on a file and say, show properties. So I can click on the eye, and this shows me the properties of this video clip. So I can see that this is a 1920 by 1080 clip. It was shot at 30 frames per second. It was shot in Rec 2020 LG. So this was the HDR on the iPhone. And it can show me a whole bunch of other information. It also shows me in terms of where this footage is. So it can show me where the file physically is. So I know that it's physically on my hard drive. And it shows me where that is if I just hover my mouse over it. And it shows me if I've created any proxy or optimized versions of them. So that's very sort of simple. And then down here at the bottom, this is called our project viewer. Now, most people will call this a timeline because in Premiere and in other editing apps, it's called a timeline. I like to call it a timeline, but for some obscure reason, Apple calls it a project in Final Cut Pro. So you can see there it's called an Untitled project. I don't know why they insist on calling it a project. It's a timeline everywhere else. Don't get confused.
That's a good point. One of the questions in the Q&A is from Steven Rosenzweig. He says, what then is a project? So a project is essentially a timeline. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay,
as far as Final Cut's terminology goes, a timeline is a project. A project is a timeline. It is a timeline for all intents and purposes, but for some reason, Apple calls it a project. So yeah, when you want to create a new timeline, you create a new project. So now we're going to start putting some footage in our timeline / project to start putting an edit together. And I'm just going to sort of pick some random clips to show you how it's done. So I'm going to click on this clip. And now you could just drag and drop. So I can just drag and drop it into my timeline. And you can see that it's warning me that I'm adding HDR footage to a non-HDR timeline. We're not going to worry about that too much. We're just going to say, okay, and it's going to be overblown, but don't worry about that because we're not looking at that right now. So that's one way to bring a clip into a timeline. Another way to bring a clip into a timeline is to use these 4 buttons down here, sort of towards the center left of your screen. Now, the first one is to connect this clip to the storyline. So this is going to, and it actually gives you a really good indication of what each button does because it gives you a little illustration. So the first one, it's going to put the clip that I selected on top of the clip that I've already got there. So I'm going to select this clip on this button, and it, okay, I'm actually going to say, don't show this again. And you can see that it puts it on top of it. And Final Cut, like all video editing apps, is a top-down looking app. So whatever clip is on the top is what you're going to see in the viewer. So that's one thing you can do. The next one is you can split your clip and insert this clip in the middle of it. So I'm just going to click on that button, and you can see that it's cut the clip in half that I had there and put the second clip in between those 2 points. I'm just going to push Command Z to undo that. The third one, and this is the one that you use most of the time, is called the Append Tool, and this will put your clip at the end of your timeline. And the keyboard shortcut for this is E. So if I click on that, it puts it after the first clip. And then if I select another clip and push E, it puts it after that clip. I select another clip, push E, it puts it after that clip. And that's and works. So that's the basics of putting things down into a timeline. Now I'm going to show you a much quicker way of doing it with some keyboard shortcuts and a more refined way of doing it. And that's also going to let me introduce you to a concept of keywords, which is one of the best things to sliced bread with Final Cut Pro.
Lee, do you want to take a question or two before you move on to this next section?
Yes, sure.
Okay. There's one from anonymous attendee. Anonymous says, where would you keep elements you use in every show? For example, intros, graphics, etc.
That is an awesome question. I'm trying to do some magic at time. Let me just.
Oh, there it is. Your video's back now.
Yeah, I know. I changed batteries.
Okay. Good.
I've just, Frederick and I were talking about this earlier. The camera that I'm using is using old Canon LP batteries, and I haven't had a Canon camera for about a decade, so I probably need to get new batteries because they don't last very long. So the question was, where would you
keep elements that you use in every show?
So there's two different ways of doing it. So for example, I actually have a folder on my editing hard drive called company graphics. And so I've got a folder for each of the companies that I work with, and I keep those external. And then I just bring them in on an ad hoc project by project basis. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is so there's a couple of corporate clients that I have that when I'm working with them, they will have specific looks that they want. So like, let's say, for example, they want when a presenter is presenting something in a video and there's a slide, they want the slide to look a particular way and a picture needs to look a particular way. So I will set up projects / timelines with that pre-built sort of look and template. And the really cool thing about, well, I mean, you could probably do this across all of them, is you can copy and paste attributes of videos or elements within a timeline. So all I do is when I'm working on those projects is I've got, like, let's say Acme is one of my clients, and I've got an Acme template timeline, and I've got all of their looks on that timeline. And so I can just copy and paste the look and feel from my template timeline onto a video clip in the project that I'm working on. And then I've just got that look in that project, and I just keep working on that project like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That does. The way that I handle that, I don't know if this makes sense, is that template that I mentioned in my sort of base Final Cut project that I use for a quarter or a year or whatever. Within that, all of the assets, the lower thirds, the music, the intro and outro sequences, they're all kind of in place around, I guess, what do you call those, slugs or just placeholders in the timeline? And then when I say I record a new interview, I'll just drag that in and replace that slug and massage everything around that. But I have a starting point already with all assets in place. Is that good or bad?
No, that absolutely works. Another thing that you can do, and this is getting a bit, again, this is getting sort of a bit more complex, but let me show you if I can remember where I've put it. So a really cool thing is you can create looks, and you can create any sort of, particularly with lower thirds, you can create a look and a feel in motion. So your lower thirds, you would probably build those in motion anyway, and then you can save those. So for example, this is from a this is the lower third from an online course that I did. So we lower thirds in motion, and you can then publish anything from motion to Final Cut as an effect or a title. So I've actually got a folder here in my generators of my lower third. So I created this in motion, and now this lives inside Final Cut as a generator. And then whenever I need it, I've got the lower thirds for this particular client. So if it was mostly graphics, so graphical stuff, you could create that in motion or bring it into motion and create a motion version and then publish it to Final Cut. And it could just live there as a folder in your, as a title or a generator or an effect.
Love it. Love it. All right,
so,
well, press on. We're like 20 minutes away from Q&A, so keep going.
Okay, cool. So we're going to jump into keywords, and this is bar none my absolute favorite. This is one of the superpowers of Final Cut, because it does introduce a little bit of work on the front end, but it means back end, when you're getting to the creative part of editing and putting things together, it definitely speeds up the creative process and doesn't slow you down by having to take yourself out of the creative process and find stuff. So let me show you what I mean. So keywords can be applied to any section of a clip. So here we go. I've got this clip of Simon walking with his bags, and I only want to use, excuse me, a certain section of it. So I want to start my selection at this point here. So I'm going to use, first of all, the J, K, and L keys to play forwards, backwards, and stop my video. So instead of using the mouse, I'm going to push the L key to go forwards on my video. And I push K to stop. And then I push the J key to go back. And every time I push them, it doubles the speed. So if I want to go play this back in double speed forwards, I push L twice. And I can play backwards 3 times speed by pushing J 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and K to stop. All making sense? And J, K, and L, that's pretty much universal. So if you're using DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, Avid, whatever, J, K, and L will work in all of them. So I'm going to say, this is where I want to start my selection. This is where I want to start my clip. So I'm going to push I for in, and you can see that it's put a selection box, a yellow selection box around my clip. I'm then going to push L to play forwards a bit and push K to stop when I get to the point where I want to stop. Yeah, and I'm happy when Simon looks the other way. So I'm now going to push O for out. And now, if I drag and drop this clip into my timeline, or I push the E key, only the section that I've selected in yellow there is going to get put onto my timeline. So I'm going to push E. That little bit has gone onto my timeline. But let's say I think that I'm going to need this bit later on. So I don't want to use it just yet, but I want to remember this bit as a bit that I might use. So I'm going to apply a keyword to it. And keywords are basically just metadata that is applied to various selections on a clip. So I'm going to either come up to the key button, which is on the top left-hand corner, which looks like a key, or I push Command K to bring up my keyword editor. And so here is my keyword editor. And you can see that there's already no keywords applied to this clip. So I'm going to go ahead and type in Simon look. And there we go. Now that keyword has been applied to this clip, but I can apply another keyword to it. So I'm going to go Simon walk. And it's a pity he's not talking, because I could have applied Simon says. Anyway, so those keywords have been applied to that section of the clip, but you can apply keywords to anything and everything in Final Cut. So I can actually go and I can go click halfway through that clip and push I. So I've now selected only the second half of that clip, and I can apply a different keyword to this. So I can go Simon walks faster, and that's applied that keyword to that clip again, to just to that section of the clip. So I hope that makes sense in terms of how you apply keywords to clips. And this little area here where you see all these pre-built ones is where you've used keywords before. And I'm just going to delete those, and you can add whichever ones you want. And this just lets you quickly select some. So if I wanted to apply Simon Look to another section of the clip, I would get to where I want to be. I would push I for in, then move my mouse to where I want it to be out, then O for out. And then I want to apply the Simon Walk keyword. I could either type it in, Control 8, which is the keyboard shortcut now for Simon Walks, and that now applies Simon Walks to that section of the clip. Now that's all well and good, but let me show you how this is actually useful. When it gets to the point of me wanting to edit, I can click on my library. Sorry, I can click on my event, and in my event, it shows me all the keywords that I've created for that event. And you can see there's some familiar characters here. There's the GoPro keyword, but I didn't create a GoPro keyword. But because I had a GoPro folder in the footage that I imported, and when it imported, I told it to create keywords from my folders, it created a keyword of GoPro. But if I go to Simon Look, there's the Simon Look, there's a Simon Walk. And where this is useful is, let's say we've keyworded everything. So we've gone through all of our footage, we've applied keywords to everything, and now we're editing. I'm an hour, 45 minutes into my edit, and suddenly I'm like, oh, you know, I need a shot of Simon walking and looking to the left, but we had like 10 shots of Simon walking, looking to the left, and they're in the middle of all these other shots. So I've got to take myself out of the creative process, go in and look through all of the shots that I think have Simon walking and looking to the left. And let's say that takes me like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long, to find the shot I'm looking for. And then I get back in and I get back into the creative flow, but I've been taken out of the creative flow. Whereas because I've keyworded it, I can go Simon Look. Oh, look, there's a shot with Simon looking, well, he's looking to the right, but you get what I'm trying to say. There's a shot of Simon looking, and it speeds up the process. So I don't have to spend all this time looking for all this footage. It's much easier to do. So I know I'm talking about something very creative, and within a creative process, I'm talking about something not particularly creative, which is basically all of your footage. But trust me, creating keywords before you start the edit is going to save you so much time when it comes to the edit. And it's going to make it a lot easier to just stay within the creative flow. And there ends the preaching about keywords, but trust me, use them, they're awesome.
Should I be using keywords, Lee, when if we're doing, or if someone's doing like a daily vlog or something repetitive like that, should they bother with keywords, or should just throw stuff in the timeline and start cutting?
That's a very good question. Yes and no. So just the creative part of it. So just when they're talking, if they did everything in one take, or if they didn't repeat themselves, then there's no need for keyword. Just chuck it in and start cutting it together. But if you're dealing with a lot of B-roll, and pretty much I think every video needs B-roll, because just looking at someone talking for an hour is very boring visually. You definitely want to always keyword the B-roll. So B-roll, for those who aren't familiar, if this was an interview, in fact, I'll just open up a library that has, excuse me, an interview. That's the one we're looking for. So here's an example of an interview clip. So here's one I prepared earlier. So here's an interview clip, and you can see that on the primary storyline, so the main storyline where I've edited, this is the person talking about the interview, what they're talking about. But you can see that above what they're talking about, when they're mentioning something, I've got a clip that visually shows you what they're talking about. So for example, Lorraine is talking about something, and you'll see what I mean here.
Lisa Phillip. I chose to go on this trip with my husband, who is a GP. This is my second trip.
By the way, this is the content that I use in the course, and this is the project where we look at sound editing. So the sound's supposed to not sound that good, because we're going to fix it in the course. But you get the idea of what I mean by B-roll. So I would have had footage of temples, and I would have had a lot of footage of tour guides explaining stuff. But the fact that I keyworded it made it a lot easier for me to find these particular clips that I was looking for. So in answer to your question, Frederick, if it's just someone talking, as long as they're not repeating themselves, then you're probably okay. But if you were cutting, let's say, an interview from that you did with a documentary, now a documentary could have hours upon hours of different people saying different things. So by keywording some of the key phrases, like let's say someone has said something like really important that you think you're going to need, if you keyword it and you're editing that interview like a month later and you need, there was that bit where he was talking about frogs. Where was that? Like you've got an hour interview and at one point the gentleman talked about frogs. If you've keyworded it, it's much easier to find that bit about frogs.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
If it's just stuff that you're recording yourself, probably don't need to, but B-roll definitely want to. Cool. So that's keyframes. Very, very, very important to know about keyframes and to understand keywords. Very important to understand how keywords work. So let me show you how I just sort of put together a very basic edit of putting some stuff together. So here is, actually, I'm just going to modify. Now, you don't need to know this. This is, again, going a little bit more complicated. But so I shot all of this content as HDR footage. And when you bring an HDR clip into a non-HDR timeline, it's conforming to HDR exposure parameters. And so it looks like it's overexposed. In order to fix that, I'm just going to make this into an HDR project so it looks okay. And this is one of the really cool things in Final Cut. You can undo or do things after the fact. So even if you forgot to do something when you set it up, so when I created this library, I didn't make it an HDR library. I can just click on the library on the left-hand side of my screen, go over to the inspector on the right-hand side where it says modify, and say, I want to make this into a wide gamut HDR library. And now the library is HDR, but the project isn't HDR. So I now click on my untitled library. And you can see there on the right-hand side where it says Rec 709, that's a Rec 7091. I click modify and I say, make this Rec 2020 HLG, which is what the iPhone shoots in when it's shooting HDR. Click OK, and huzzah, now everything looks right.
Wow.
So, and that's, I know, but we don't have the time. But I can explain it if anyone has any questions. But
that process should be easier, Lee. Why is it so many clicks just to do that from an iPhone to an Apple software product?
Well, there's a couple of different things. So that's the way that I did it is probably not the way that people should do it. And the reason why I say that is because now this is an HDR project, and if I deliver this and someone's viewing it on a non-HDR monitor, it's going to look terrible. Everything's going to look blown out. So the other way to do this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this project. So I'm just going to go select my project, which is my timeline, but they call it project. And I'm going to say duplicate project. And I'm going to call this one SDR, and I'm going to call this one HDR. So here's how you would do it. Here's not necessarily a quicker way, but here's the more correct way to do it for most people. So I'm just going to select this one and click on modify again and change this one back to a standard Rec 709 SDR project. And when we go into that, everything out. And so in Final Cut, there's an effect to fix this really quickly, which is you go into your effects, click on all, go down to the search option in the bottom right-hand side, type in HDR, and it brings up your HDR tools. And then you drag your HDR tool onto the clip. I know this seems like more steps, but trust me, you only have to do this once and then it's easier. Go back up to the inspector, select your HDR tool. Now, I happen to know that the HDR that's shot on iPhones is actually HLG. So we're going to make it HLG, which should have, oh no, we want HLG, other way around, HLG to Rec 709. And there we go, that's fixed it. And now all I have to do is I now just need to paste that onto every clip that I bring into here that's been shot in HDR. So I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of different clips on here. And now all I do is I come to the first one that I fixed, select on C to copy, select all the others. Now I'm going to show you another keyboard shortcut, which is phenomenally useful. Now you can see how in my timeline, it's not showing me everything that's in my timeline. Now, if I'm on a trackpad, I can pinch and pull to zoom in and out, but that's not particularly precise because it's difficult to control. I can come over to the middle right-hand side of my screen and click on this button here and use that to zoom in and out. So I can zoom in and out like that. I can use Command plus to zoom in, Command minus to zoom out. But the easiest one is to push Shift Z, and that will make it fit to screen. And Shift Z is fit to screen in anything. So for example, if I went to my viewer and changed the view to 100%, so zoomed in too much, click on the viewer, click Shift Z, and it fits the screen.
I love it.
So finishing off on applying that to every copy, excuse me, drag and select all of those clips, and then I go Command Shift V, and this will allow me to paste attributes. Again, this is getting a bit more complicated than I was planning to, but this then allows you to select different attributes to paste onto all of these clips. So if I had done a color correction, or if I had changed the scale or the position, or if I'd cropped, or if I distorted, or if I'd done any audio thing, if anything that I've done to that one clip that I copied, I can individually paste bits and pieces, or I can paste everything that I've done to that clip to all of these other clips. I say paste, and there we go. It's applied it to all of those clips.
Wow. Here's a question for you from Craig Stampley. He says, how do you color grade / edit different clips from different sources on one timeline or project?
Oh, one of my favorite questions. I'm so glad you asked. Before we get into that, I just want to show you one really important thing. So I'm going to push Command N, which is going to ask me to create a new timeline / project. Command N, because I want to just show you this window that shows you the different options. So when you create a new project, you give it a name. It asks you what event it wants to go into. Now it'll ask you what resolution it is. So by default, it'll look at the last sort of clip that you used, but you can select 1080, 720, 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, 360. And Final Cut deals with 360 footage fantastically. Vertical, if you're under 40 and you want to make things for the TikToks. Square, which I think is for the Instagrams, and custom. So you can set it to whatever you like if you've got a particular resolution. And then you can also set your frame rate. And your frame rate, now, if you've dealt with video in the past, frame rate is very difficult. So if you were trying to have multiple clips with different frame rates in the same timeline, it'd cause a mess. And it potentially could cause a mess. But Final Cut, and here comes my Apple fanboyness coming out, but Final Cut, I think, out of all the video editors out there, deals best with having multiple frame rates on a single timeline. So if you've shot something on an iPhone at 30 frames per second, and you've shot something on a Red camera at 120 frames per second, and you've shot something on a old webcam at 24 or whatever, you could put them all on the same timeline, and Final Cut will just make it work. There might be some little jittery issues with some really random projects. Like I was just helping someone out earlier today with something that was shot for television in the 90s, which is quote unquote fun. But generally your frame rates are going to be absolutely fine, no issues. Let's go and have a look at some of the color grading options in Final Cut. And I will get on to, Fred, remind me how you can get different clips to match from different cameras.
Okay.
So let's say I want to color grade this clip here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push Command 7, and that's going to bring up my color grading scopes, or to be able to see what's going on. And it hasn't really brought up the ones that I like to use. So I'm going to click on View, and I'm going to have a 3-up view, and this is better, but this isn't giving me everything I want still. So actually I'm going to go with just a 2-up. Where's my, okay, I can't see my 2-ups. I think it's above where the menu should be. So we'll just live with the 3-up, but I can then click on the top right-hand corner of any of these and change these. So I'm going to change that. It's going to be my waveform, but I'm actually going to make it my Luma waveform. And this one, we're going to my Rgb Parade. Why not? So very quickly to explain what these are. The waveform is like your histogram, but it's on its side. So on a histogram, your left is your darkest point, your right is your lightest point. On a waveform, the bottom is your darkest point. So 0 is black and 100 is white. So that's the easiest way to understand. So if you go over 100, you've overexposed your footage. You can't do anything with it. And if you go on below 0, it's black. You can't see anything. Your Rgb Parade works just like your Rgb Parade works on anything else. And your vector scope represents the color that is in your footage. So the saturation. And you can see that it's blue, magenta, red, yellow, green, and cyan. So even without looking at this clip, I can see that this clip is relatively evenly colored, but there's just a little bit of sort of edging towards the green. And then when I look at it, oh yeah, there's a lot of grass in there. So that's great. So these are your scopes that are going to help you guide you through what you want to do in your color grading. But on this nice screen here, it's a little bit small. It's a little bit, it's squishing me in. So I'm going to go up to the top of my screen and click on Window and come down to Workspaces and Final Cut. Now you can create your own, but Final Cut actually has a pre-built one for color and effects. So if I click on color and effects, it just reorganizes my windows to make it a bit better to work with what I want to do here. And I'm just going to just click on the center, just bring that down a little bit so I can see my scopes a bit better. And I'm going to go to just a 2 up there. So I've just got my vector scope and I've got my waveform, because those are pretty much the 2 that I use. And then I come over the top right-hand corner of my screen above my inspector. And the first little thing, it's like a little triangle, and that's your color effects. Now, if you're using Final Cut, by default, yours will look like this, which is a color. I prefer to use color wheels. So I've actually gone into my preferences in Final Cut Pro, gone into editing. Now I've gone into general, and where it says color correction, I've changed the default from color board to color wheels. So by default, when I'm using Final Cut and I bring up my color grading tools, the first one that comes up is my color wheel. So I'm just going to change that to a color wheel. And now you can see that there's something underneath it. So if I scroll up and down, there's more options there. So I want to see that across my screen. So I'm going to click on the effects button in the center, which is the blue one that's highlighted, to hide my effects tab. And I'm going to come to the top of my color wheels inspector, double click on it, and that stretches it out to take up the whole screen. So that just makes it a little bit easy. Worth the price of admission.
All right, now you can get a check. Okay.
and you can do that with everything. In my audio tab, again, double click to bring it back up, double click to bring it back down. So you can do that with anything in the inspector. So that
all these years, I had no idea.
All these years, huh? Don't worry, there's buttons that I still find every now and again. So your color wheels, very basically, global is your global color, your shadows, your highlights, your midtones. You got your temperature down here at the bottom, so you can adjust your white balance, and most important, little arrow button, that's your undo. And the way the color wheels work is on the right-hand side is your luminance. So that's making your image darker or brighter, and you can see that the waveform is adjusting accordingly. And on the left-hand side is your saturation. So that's putting more saturation in or pulling your saturation out. So, and you can see there the waveform, as I put more saturation in, as I make my image more saturated, the white area gets bigger because there's more color in there. And then the center of the wheel is where you've actually got tonal changes. So as you drag it, so for example, if I drag this wheel towards green and have a look at my vector scope on the left, there's my color, my saturation has more of a tone towards green. Let me tell you, the most important thing, the key to using this center little dial thing, less is more. You want to make very, very little tiny, finite things you can do with that. And I'm just going to click undo to undo that. Just while we're in here, I just want to show you really quickly the other tools that you've got. You've got your color curves. So if those who are familiar with color curves, you've got color curves in here, and you've got hue saturation curves. You can do some really cool stuff in here. So watch this. So let's say I want to change a certain hue in this clip. So let's say I want to change the color of Simon's jeans. So I come over to the top right-hand side of hue versus hue, click on the little eyedropper, click on the jeans where I want to change it. So that's worked out that that's the hue of Simon's jeans. And then I just drag this up and down, and I can just change the hue of Simon's jeans. Now, the problem is, if you look really closely, this little black box is being affected by that as well. And I don't want that to happen. So what I can do is I can click on the top here where there's this little sort of square with a circle in it, say add a shape mask, and then drag that just over the area where I want that effect to apply. And so now it's just going to apply within that effect. And you've got, you know, your feathering and all that kind of stuff. And trust me, there's so much other stuff that I want to show you, but we just don't have time. Get the course. I cover this in the course.
I love it. So let's get some questions in as you wrap up, Lee. So go ahead and wrap and then we'll do the questions.
Just one last thing, because I haven't shown you yet how to match cameras.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And you can see there that all those tools that I applied are now live. If I come over to my inspector, they're all in these effects. So you can just click on each of these to turn on as you go along. So let me show you sort of one of the tools that Final Cut Pro has got to match clips up. So I actually don't use this that often, so I can't remember exactly where it is. And this is also the really cool thing about Final Cut Pro. Well, also, so first of all, you've got the match color option. I've forgotten about that because I never use it. So first of all, you've got the match color option. And what that does is if I click on this clip here, come over to my tools over on the far left, sort of the middle center, and click on the one that looks like a little magic wand. And the first one, it says match color. And I click on match color, and then it says, what color do you want to match that to? So I just go and find the color that I want to match it to, click on that, and it shows me what it thinks is a match. And if I'm happy with it, I say apply match, or I can say cancel. And I'll just say apply. That's a really quick and easy way to match shots. That'll work probably 30% of the time, maybe. Like that's the first thing you try, but to be honest, like it very rarely works. So the next thing you can do is bring up your compare tool. Comparison viewer. That's what I'm looking for. So, and this is what's really cool. As long as you know the name of what you're looking for in Final Cut, and this is across most apps on a Mac, type it into the help option and it'll show you where that option is on the app. So the keyboard shortcut takes more fingers than a bloody octopus. It's Option Shift Command V. I've got to change that to make it easier. But you click on that. I should bring my workspace back to my default workspace. So we come into workspaces and say default. And click up here and bring up comparison viewer. And so you can bring up a comparison viewer, and that way you can just have it locked off on a particular shot or have it locked off on a particular edit. And that way you can always see that one shot that you want to compare it to. And you can actually bring up a particular, you can save a particular frame. You can bring up scopes for that as well. So again, you could match it up just with the scope. So the comparison viewer is probably one of your best bets when it comes to trying to match shot for shot. And also there's a third-party app you can buy called City Match, which that's also really good at matching different cameras up. But so if you want an easy way, use the match option, buy a City Match, which is really good. But if you want to get really good at color grading, use the viewer, do it manually, and it'll take more time when you start because you're learning, but you will learn a lot.
Excellent.
Sorry, I barreled through that.
No, that was fantastic. That was good. So let's do some questions here real quick. So let's blow through these. The first one is from Dan Donovan. He says, what camera settings do you use when shooting with the iPhone 13 Pro?
That is a very, let me just switch back to my camera. That's a very good question, Dan. Again, I'm going to frustrate you with a it depends answer, but it does. So if I'm going for the best quality, I'll probably use an app called Filmic Pro. Now there's quite a few different apps that do this, but I'll use Filmic Pro. And the reason why I use Filmic Pro, number one, you've got far more manual control over the phone, but particularly you've got manual control over the different flavors. New iPhone 13 Pro can shoot ProRes, but the default ProRes that the native app, the native camera app uses on the 13 Pro is ProRes 422HQ, which is fantastic quality, but I would say is too much. And the files are ridiculously big, and to get the files off the phone is a pain in the tush. So I use Filmic Pro, and I'll just use in ProRes 422 as opposed to ProRes 422 HQ. When I'm filming just something stupid that my son is doing, I'll just open up the camera app and film whatever settings are there.
There you go. Occam's razor. All right, Dan Donovan, hope that answers your question. Next up is Steven Rosenzweig. He says, there was a fourth input symbol next to the 3 you explained. What does it do? I'm not sure what dialogue he's talking about.
No, I know exactly what he means because I left it out. I almost left it out on purpose to see if someone, well, I didn't leave it out I left it out and I was wondering if someone was going to pull me up with it. So well done on that. So the button I think you're referring to, these 3 buttons, and then there's this 4th one here. This allows you to select whether you bring in just the video, just the audio, or the video and the audio of your video clip. And you might think, why would I ever want to do this? Well, particularly in an interview situation, you've got the audio of your interview. So let's say this was some interview footage that we've shot, and now I want to bring in my B-roll. So I'm just going to bring my B-roll on top of the interview footage. And now I've brought in my B-roll, but now I've got to come onto my B-roll and pull the audio down because I don't want to hear the audio from my B-roll. So it would be much easier for me to select this button, say video only. And now when I bring a clip down, it just brings the clip without the audio.
Oh,
so
clever.
That's what, but very, very super, I can't stress this enough, important. When you're done, remember to switch it off, because otherwise you're going to put like 3 or 4 video clips down into your timeline and then go, why have I got no audio on these clips? So yeah, just a word of warning.
Love it. All right. Brian says, have you ever filmed using an Osmo Pocket? Thoughts versus shooting with a DSLR versus iPhone?
Osmo Pocket. No, I haven't used an Osmo Pocket, but I've used tons of, in fact, Frederick and I were just talking about this before.
Yeah. Yeah. The Go, right?
Here is my Instago 360. I'm sorry to keep doing this, but it really does depend. You know, like I've got my Sony FX9 with
that's
all
portable.
The big, well, hey, I'm picking it up with one hand. That's you know.
Now hold it for 10 minutes.
Well, that's why I've got an Easy Rig, which if anyone knows a giant sort of backpack thing that has a hook that comes over your head that distributes the weight, which costs a fortune, but it's a lot cheaper than a chiropractor. So in answer to your question, it really does depend. So like when I'm doing like YouTube videos and I want to get like a hands-on thing, I'll take my Insta360 Go and mount it on my hat, and then I've got like a POV view of while I'm doing stuff, which is really cool. If I just want to talk to the camera, again, having this is really handy because it's magnetic, so I'll just clip it on something metal, and there we go. I'm just chatting to it. So yes, the quality is important, and wherever possible, I will use the biggest camera possible to get the best quality possible. But just like people were saying when they switched to mirrorless from DSLRs, if the thing's so heavy that I can't be bothered to take it out, I'm still not going to get the shot. So any and every camera has its place, and you have different use cases for them.
Yep. All right. Steven says, if this is a movie of a trip, would you keyword videos from each location?
So what I would do is, depending on how you've got those videos, I would set up, before I bring it into Final Cut, I would pre-organize it, and I'd set up a folder for each location, copy the videos from each location into that folder, and that way it's already keyworded. And then depending on how you're doing the video, what you need for the video, like you might need specific things from each of those videos. So particularly where you've got multiple takes. So let's say you went on a trip to Yellowstone, and there's that famous geyser in Yellowstone, and you managed to get 10 different shots of the geyser, but you're not going to use all 10, and you're not going to use them yet. So you might have a folder called Yellowstone, and in that you're going to have best shot of geyser, second shot of geyser, but you might just keyword that, and you'll go through them before you edit, and you go best shot of geyser, and you keyword that. And now when you need to find the best shot of the geyser, you don't have to go back into that keyword collection and find the best of 10 because you've already keyworded it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good habit forming, right? If you get into the habit of doing that, then it just makes your life easier. But the problem is getting into that habit and breaking the habit of, you know, I'm just going to do it this way. And
also on bigger projects, I have assistants who do that for me.
There you go. Or hire assistants if you got it like that.
Yeah. As Scott Bourne says, that's what assistants are for.
That's right. Again, if you got it like that, you can do it. Stephen has another question. Let me get to that at the end about the course. Bobby Thompson says, how about working with cinema mode footage in iPhone 13, changing focus after the fact?
Excellent question. And luckily enough, this whole project that I was demonstrating for you was shot on iPhone 13. Some of that footage in here, which I can't remember which shots it was. Actually, wait, no, it'll be the one that was 10.
Wait, you didn't keyword those shots, Lee Herbet? Come on.
Actually, I'll tell you what this footage is for. This footage was actually stuff that I shot for a presentation I did for the Final Cut Pro Summit with how to edit on iMovie on your iPhone. So like it was already there on iPhone. But here's where I'm so clever. Because I know that the cinematic mode is only 1080, 30 frames per second, all I had to do was just go through my clips really quickly and find one that was 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second. And I'm pretty confident this is a cinematic mode one. So I'm just going to push E to put it into my timeline and then select it. And I'm working without a wire here because I actually, I played with this when it first came out and I haven't played with it since. But if you right click on the clip, show video animation, I think it's in there, and four corners, nope, it's not there. So where is, let me see, focus, adjust focus. Okay, well, let's bring up the manual. Let me just quickly check where that was. You can switch focus, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, this is a bit cheap to be looking up the manuals. I thought it was in there. Where? Maybe it's in the inspector. I think
the presenter's nightmare.
Yeah, sorry, folks. I feel really bad that I'm like reading the manual. I know how to do it in iMovie. I just haven't done it in Final Cut.
You're gonna have to record a short video clip that I can send out with the replay.
I'm really embarrassed now. Where the heck have they moved that? It's not in the. Okay. No, I was right. Show cinematic editor. I guess I didn't. This isn't the cinematic clip. So often showing off that, look how clever I am. I wasn't that clever. This I'm almost confident was a cinematic clip. So if you select the clip, right click on it, show cinematic. Okay. I'm sorry, folks. I'm not sure why. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know why it's grayed out. I must have done something wrong. I apologize.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll figure it out and follow up on that.
Yeah.
All right. Second to last question is from Gibran. Gibran says, how do you resolve using videos from different sources, DSLM, mirrorless, and mobiles with varying bit rates and frame rates on a single timeline?
So again, as I was saying earlier, you pretty much just drag them into the timeline and let Final Cut worry about it. I've found that majority of the time, again, it depends because your mileage will vary. There will be times when it can potentially cause issues. What you could do if it is causing an issue is, so there's a $50 app that Apple makes called Compressor, and basically is like for converting video from one format to another. So what you could do is take all the random clips and use Compressor to create ProRes 422 versions of everything, and then bring those into Final Cut, and those will hopefully those should play nice with each other. But it's difficult because those situations are, every situation is going to be different with that kind of challenge.
Very cool. All right, let's wrap it up. The final question is from Stephen, which is not a plant, but Stephen wants to know about the course that you recorded, Lee, for This Week in Photo. Tell us about that, and I'll screen share the course page real quick.
So I developed the course towards the end of last year, just after Final Cut Pro came out with a nice good update. And so it was funny. I initially developed the course. The idea was it was just going to be like a 101 course, and it is a 101 course. But I like the stuff, so I go on about it, and the course is sort of like just under 4 hours worth of content. And the whole idea behind the course is to get you from woe to go with Final Cut. So it's not like super advanced, but it covers just about everything you can do with Final Cut, and it gets you going and gets you up and running, but gives you that extra little bit of depth. Also, I've got, if I'll share my screen again in a little bit, and what I've done is I've created a library of a project that I worked on. So this was from an actual job that I did for a travel company that I do a lot of work for. This was a tour that we had in Jordan. So here you can see this is like all the demo content that we were working with. So this is an actual job, and we provide you with these files. So everyone learns in different ways. So if you're someone who just wants to watch the course and just watch it in your own pace and just watch it and learn by watching it, absolutely you can do that. If you're one of those people who prefers to play along while I'm explaining stuff and demoing stuff, we've got the demo content there for you. So you can work with the footage that needs to be fixed and the footage that needs to be adjusted and so on. So you can actually work at your own pace, and it can be hands-on or not be hands-on. So however you learn is how we've tried to cover it.
Very good. Yeah, and it's a brilliant course. I love the interface that it's in, and the course content is at the top. So just real quick on that. So what we did was that page, let me just share that again real quick while I run through this stuff at the end. So you get this course. So Lee's course is $97, one-time payment, you own it. But Lee is giving everyone 20% off with the code Lee2020. And I'll put that in the chat. That'll knock 20% off this $97 price. If you want to get access to Lee's course and all of the courses within the TWiP community, sign up for the yearly membership or the lifetime membership at $540. And that will give you access to Lee's course as well as the other ones that are in there and the courses that are going to be released throughout 2022. So, and that's that. So let me put that coupon code in here. It's 20% off. And what do we say it was? Lee 2022, right?
Lee 2022, yeah.
There you go. Lee 2022 will knock 20% off that course. There's the link. Again, if you just want to join the community, become a member of the TWiP community, you get access to the course library where this thing lives. And Lee is a member of the community as well. So you can feel free to just bug him at all hours of the night and he will respond to your Final Cut questions. And it's all good, right, Lee? You're always sitting in that room waiting for questions.
Absolutely. The problem is I will bug you back at all hours of the night with the answers.
With the answers like, let's look at the time zone. Oh, they're in New York. Let's try 3 a.m.
It's always, it's just like it's always 5 p.m. somewhere, it's always 3 a.m. somewhere else.
Always. All right. I think that's it. So we ran a little bit long. Thank you everybody for hanging in there. Again, there'll be a replay for this as well. We'll probably send that out tomorrow, likely, if at the latest Saturday, the replay will go out. But I encourage you to check out that course. Lee has poured his heart and soul into that course. And Lee, I hope you'll be updating that too, because it feels like we're at the verge of having an update to Final Cut Pro. It feels a little long in the tooth. It might be time for some significant updates to the software. I know you don't know, you can't say anything, but I feel it in my bones that it's ready for a rev. So when that happens, hopefully you will update the course with all the new revelations in the rev, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, and I actually, there's some really cool tracking stuff that came out in the last one that I want to cover, but I just haven't quite found the right way to cover it yet.
Yeah, excellent. All right, folks, thank you for hanging in there on your Thursday night. Thank you, Lee Herbet. This is amazing. You did a fantastic job. And thank you to the folks at the DVE store for helping us put on this episode and use their Zoom account and all that. I think this is fantastic. So Lee, we'll leave it right there. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Good night.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Really appreciate it. See ya.
This is TWiP.